Who's this?
Yeah, we're live.
Moffat, Secretary General for North America for the Universal Peace Federation. This program today is a year-end recap of the work of the International Media Association for Peace, which has done a stellar job of covering very complex, what we would call the big ticket issues. It's not just issues related to media per se and how the media covers things, but it's been based on values, covering things like media's social responsibility, women's issues, God and science, even taking a run at unraveling the complicated issues of the Middle East and their relationship to values in the media. The uh, chairman or coordinator, national coordinator, really the boss for the United States for the International Media Association for Peace, or IMAP, as you will hear it talked about in its acronym form, is Mr. Hans Moyer, who was originally from East Germany. And his mother got him on just about the last train out of East Berlin into West Berlin. Otherwise, there would be no Hans Moyer to coordinate IMAP here today. It's a wonderful man. He has a beautiful family, and we love them all. On his team is Peggy Yujiri, who's with Universal Peace Federation in Colorado, Ray Lipowcan, who is the director in Pittsburgh, and Mr. Pierre Beauregard, who is in Canada, UPF Canada. And those four people, along with those three, along with Hans Moyer, have been the mainstay organizers of this throughout the year. So I'm going to get out of here and turn it over to them to talk about the work that they have done this year. And it is quite a body of work, quite a level of accomplishment. So Hans Moyer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Larry, and much appreciated your comments and your insights. And we're going to try to share with our audience today the just the highlights of the many programs that we were able to produce. So again, like Larry said, my name is Hans Moyer. I'll be your host for today's program. It has been my privilege to coordinate the IMAP project for the last 4 years since its inception in 2020 at the World Summit Conference in Korea. Shaping and proclaiming a message media affirming universal values, peaceful coexistence, and mutual prosperity during this transitional era in history presents many challenges and opportunities. The IMAP media team, led by our veteran media expert Larry Moffat, have invested their talents and time to shape a refreshing new narrative presenting insights, clarity, and empowerment for a global audience on the issues of the day. Boldly proclaiming religious freedom as the bedrock for all other freedoms, our team of Peggy, Pierre, and Ray, and myself have produced a body of work on far-ranging themes promoting a moral media dedicated to shaping narratives of lasting consequences. Our IMAP team would like to express their gratitude to the Universal Peace Federation USA and the Washington Times Foundation for their guidance and support in this endeavor. Our special thanks goes to Mr. Larry Moffat, who has been our steadfast guide and inspiration throughout the years. We would also like to thank Dr. Michael Jenkins, the president of UPF USA, for all his support and constant inspiration and guidance in the work of IMAP North America. So we would like to begin our review of this year of 2024 with Peggy Yujiri. Peggy lives in Denver area with her husband, Kenji. They have 3 grown children. I believe there's a couple of grandchildren as well. She serves as the executive director of UPF Colorado and the Rocky Mountain coordinator for IMAP. Peggy has over 40 years of experience in organizing interfaith and intercultural conferences and promoting faith-based values in the U.S. and internationally. Peggy will review with us several of her webinars produced in 24. Peggy, the stage is all yours.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you, Hans, and thank you for your leadership during this year and previous years as well. I'm going to present about 3 webinars that I was the moderator for this year and put together. And I'd like to share the flyers as I speak. So I'm going to do that for a minute. Here we go. Okay, that's visible, right? The first webinar I'd like to talk about is one entitled Women Standing for Religious Freedom. This was partly the outgrowth of Ray and I attending the IRF summit that was held in Washington, D.C., and meeting some of these champions of religious freedom over there. It took place on February 27th. And our first panelist was Moriko Hori, and she serves as the international president of the Women's Federation for World Peace and oversees their international service projects in over 50 countries. Mrs. Hori explained to us on the webinar how WFWP has been banned from using public facilities and faces other public discrimination and loss of financial support for their work solely due to their religious affiliation and the ongoing discrimination against members of FFWPU in Japan. Our second speaker was Elfidar Iltabir, the president of the Uyghur American Association, and she explained to us a lot of details about the genocide against the Uyghurs in East Turkmenistan in China. And she laid out a shocking scenario of the detention of millions of Uyghurs in detention centers where they live in deplorable conditions, and also talked about the widespread forced abortions and sterilization of Uyghurs, the forced labor transfer of over 1.6 million people, and their forced marriage often to Han Chinese. Children are systematically separated from their children and put in state-controlled orphanages where they're educated as loyal Chinese citizens. She also thought that the reason for this was that the Chinese Communist Party wants to indoctrinate all of these people to be loyal citizens primarily to the state and not to the religion. And one shocking thing she told us is that instead of having signs on the mosques that say thanks to Allah, the one God, they now say we give thanks for the CCP and Xi Jinping. Also, their culture and their language are being eliminated. And our last panelist, Frances Wee, serves as the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator for the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. She was an early participant in the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, and as a result, she had received so much persecution that she was the first political asylum seeker in the US to be admitted when she was still just a teenager. She focused on the plight of religious communities in Hong Kong and the increasing CCP repression and control. They are having the same problem in Hong Kong as the Uyghurs, although perhaps not quite as egregious. And religious groups are required to align with socialist and communist doctrines, customs, and morality. So their purpose is to indoctrinate even religious believers to have their first loyalty to the state. So all of our panelists were appreciative of the opportunity we gave them to share their stories and to be heard. And they suggested that everybody who attended the webinar become active in contacting members of Congress and trying to bring these religious freedom violations to the attention of Congress so that perhaps the US could intervene in some way to improve their situation. Our next webinar, the next webinar I'm going to speak about is the one entitled Religion and the Media, Harmony or Discord. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, good. This provided an opportunity to ensure some of the ways that faith and media, or to explore some of the ways that faith and media intersect, and the tensions between faith and media, which are numerous. Our first panelist was Dr. Deborah Mason. She's the professor and director emerita of the Missouri School of Journalism, a very prestigious journalism school, which is still one of the top journalism schools in America. She was also the founding director of Religion News Service and a former publisher of Religion News Service. We also had Professor Joel Campbell, who's associate teaching professor at BYU School of Communications, as well as John Dye, executive director of Skylight.org, which is an initiative of the Radiant Foundation. He was sitting in for Angela Redding, who was ill that day. The first person to speak was Dr. Mason. She has an incredible background of promoting the coverage of religion and faith issues in media. She doesn't think that there's a bias against religion in media, but she feels that a lot of the reason that it's not covered is that reporters hesitate to cover faith issues because they don't have much background in faith issues, and they're afraid of offending somebody or, creating some kinds of controversy by overlooking some of the nuances of different faiths. Professor Campbell is actually a champion of teaching about faith coverage to his students, and he regularly takes his students on field trips, even to New York and other places, to visit faith communities, and he encourages them always to look for the thing they can admire about every community. He calls that holy envy. And he says that they should always think about what they could learn for their own faith tradition from others instead of looking for things to criticize. So he really tries to get his students to have an open-minded view, no matter what faith they're covering. And then John Dye, he walked us through a recent global survey that the Radiant Foundation had done. And he found that this survey found that many people really long for having more religious coverage, but that one thing that could increase the coverage, he feels, is to have more educational programs for journalists, to simply make them more literate in the terms of religions. And he says that, sometimes the things that people of faith are doing that are positive, they're not exactly highly controversial or what would be called clickbait, and therefore they don't get the coverage of more controversial and perhaps antagonistic stories. So when we asked them what they could suggest for faith communities, how they could improve their representation in the media, they suggested that these panelists suggested that some of the things that could be done would be for faith communities to themselves start writing articles and submit them to newspapers, write op-ed pieces, also get stories out on social media, and that when things are happening in the world that are something that they have something to say about, they shouldn't remain quiet, but they should step up and stand out. They should provide positive, inspirational stories, and this is something that would always be welcomed by the public. And the third webinar I'm going to talk about is one called Promoting a Socially Responsible and Moral Media. And this was the flyer. This was such an uplifting webinar. Our panelists were, first of all, Wendy Francis, who's the National Director for Politics for the Australian Christian Lobby, and Penny Rankin, Vice President for Children and Youth for the National Council of Women of Canada. And they addressed the issues with a lot of compassion and wisdom. Just recently, I read that Australia has now banned social media for children under 13. And I'm sure that Wendy Francis must have been one of the really instigators behind passing that law. So in response to a question about what people of faith can do to advocate for moral media, Wendy suggested that people of faith become journalists themselves, get to know journalists, and contribute their voices on social media. Kind of a lot of the same advice we got on the previous webinar. She mentioned that it's important to always stick to the truth, not exaggerate, and to always be considerate and respectful to others, even if you don't agree with them. Penny Rankin also agreed that making close contacts with journalists is vital. And she said it's best to do this by building personal relationships. That takes patience and also the ability to listen to what the other person is saying respectfully, and to, introduce your ideas or our ideas from a position of humility and yet of strength. She said we shouldn't worry about appearing foolish, but rather believe that God is supporting us in this effort. Her organization is supporting a bill that would require age verification for youth in order to access porn online, which there is not currently a law that requires that social media companies ensure that youth cannot access porn online, and they don't have to show any age verification at present. She also, Wendy also emphasized the importance of calling out situations when norms of decency are being violated. And she's really a champion in this area and is constantly working on getting petitions going and advocating for legislation to make the environment in Australia, where she lives, more safe for young people. When asked about how they use the media to get their message out, did I close that? Wendy says she pays attention to which journalists look at her press releases, and then she tries to follow up with them and build relationships. So these two ladies both encouraged us to be engaged and involved, to never give up, to pray and seek God's guidance for our work. And I'd like to say for these two wonderful ladies, as well as for our other speakers, we're very grateful that they took time to participate and to share their wisdom with us on all three of these webinars. And we also definitely want to thank all of you who tuned into our webinars and watched them and sent out your comments. And we hope that if you enjoyed them, that you'll share them with others. And we really couldn't even do this if we didn't have all of you, our audience, and we like to express our ongoing gratitude to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, for those comments and insights. And we do have a YouTube channel at UPF USA IMAP, and all of our webinars are featured there. And we'll put the link in the chat for you. So if you're interested in learning more, all of these webinars have really been insightful, and they're relevant for today, the issues that are on at the kitchen table. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Pierre Beauregard to review his webinars that he produced in the past year. Pierre earned his degree in business administration at Haute Édes Commerciale in Montreal, Canada. I hope I said that right. He completed a master's in religious education at the Unification Theological Seminary. Pierre is now retired from a 20-year career as a certified financial planner with Desjardins Group. Since 2021, Pierre's been coordinating for the IMAP in Canada. And Pierre will share several of his webinars now. Pierre, the floor is yours.
So as you can tell, I studied in French. I worked in French, so it's difficult for Hans to say Hautes Études Commerciales and Desjardins Group, but I appreciate your effort, Hans. So I will now share a PowerPoint with to show the programs I did. And so the first program, actually, it's interesting because Peggy mentioned Penny Rankin in her last webinar. And the reason I know Michelle Abel is because Penny Rankin invited her at Concordia University on a 2 or 3 day event to support the protection of children from online pornography. And Michelle Abel is an incredible person who has survived from a horrible situation of familial trafficking. I bet you nobody knows such a thing exists. Familial trafficking means that you're trafficked by your own family. So some parents traffic their own children or husbands their spouse. This is a real thing. So the title here, The Victims Live Among Us, is never so real as exemplified by such an experience as the one of Michelle Abel. And my other guest, Patrick Erlandson, is someone who's been focusing on highlighting the horror of sex trafficking in the Los Angeles area. He became aware of the problem of this problem through his work with UNHCR in the Sudan, where he first was there, I believe, in around 2010. And he became aware that children were being taken in Sudan by some doctors who would then extract organs and sell their organs and then bury the children dead. This completely shocked him, and he brought him to dedicate the rest of his life to help highlight the horrors of sex trafficking, because there's human trafficking, labor trafficking, use of organs, like I just stated. And this is the reality that in the world today, we say that there is no more slavery, but in reality, there are 40 million people living in slavery-like conditions, whether it's labor trafficking or sex trafficking. There are more people living in slave-like conditions, slavery conditions, than at any time at the time of the Black slavery in the past. So we are not out of the woods. Humanity still has horrible problems to resolve. And so this here was focusing on their work. So in 2018, Patrick Erlandson founded See It and End It Film and Arts Festival. It's an annual event that features films and performances, as well as panel discussions and calls to end the epidemic of human trafficking. I helped him in that webinar in being a moderator on a panel of amazing people. There are incredible people out there doing amazing work. And I think the movie by Angel Studios that everybody saw about trafficking in South America brought a lot of that to your attention. As far as Michelle Abel, she spoke on the basis of her experience as a survivor of familial trafficking. And since her youth, she has sought to protect children from the abuse that she experienced. So in 2022, she founded Bridge to Future, a Canadian nonprofit which focuses on research and advocacy against generational trauma, intimate partner violence, and commercial sexual exploitation of women and children. Her current focus is on safeguarding and empowering children to protect from online harm. And she is doing that with the Salvation Army as well. She works with the Salvation Army in the Toronto area and does amazing work to help parents how to protect their children from being victimized. The next webinar, the next webinar was on God and Science. So in this webinar, which was held in July, I had our own Dr. Kathy Winings, whom many listening to this video probably know, but maybe not everybody knows that besides being an accomplished educator and intellectual, she is passionate about brain science, and even more so since her near-death experience in 2019. and she talked to us a bit about that. And then Dinsha Dadachanji, who is a research director for Hyojong International Foundation for Environmental Peace, talked about frontier science or post-materialist science that is looking into the reality of the spiritual world, or of conscience beyond death, that the conscience exists beyond death. So Dr. Wining shared her journey through science and spirituality, focusing on her experiences and insight gained from the study of neuroscience. And she described how her perspective shifted from a more academic and cognitive approach to a deeper understanding of the intricate relationship between the brain, body, and consciousness. She also highlighted the significance of neuroscience in explaining the world from both a physical and intentional design perspective. Kathy noted the rapid development of neuroscience since 2005, with a particular trend towards an increased focus in the field in 2014. She shared about her near-death experience in 2021. I'm sorry, I said 2019, I was wrong. And the subsequent conversation she's had led her to a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness between science and spirituality and love. Dinsha Dadachanji organized 2 series of conferences: the International Conference on the Unity of Sciences and the International Conference on Science and God. He discussed the relationship between science and religion, arguing they are not inherently incompatible. He defined science as any system of knowledge concerned with the physical world, and emphasized that scientific materialism, while a dominant worldview, is not the only valid one. He also introduced the concept of frontier science, which proposes a new paradigm that consciousness is more fundamental than matter, and that minds can affect objects at a distance. He suggested that a second revolution, a revolution of the heart, is needed to complement the scientific revolution. And thirdly, my third webinar, is, sorry about that. What did I do? Okay, I'll try again. Okay. So, peace in the Middle East. On November 26, 2020, just less than a month ago, we had David Fraser Harris, who's Secretary General of UPF Middle East and Northern Africa, who gave an overview of the work of UPF and as an NGO doing humanitarian work in the region. And Hajiba Ayubi, who's a medical doctor working for the government of Morocco and as well senior advisor for UPF Morocco, spoke about the specific situation in Morocco and what was done. And Binod Padel addressed the situation of Turkey. He's the president of UPF Turkey. So in that webinar, David Fraser Harris acknowledged the difficulty in discussing peace in the region that is currently, as well as historically, embroiled in pervasive conflict. While politicians may handle formal negotiations, he believes the NGOs have an important role to play in opening the minds and hearts and finding ways to foster understanding and cooperation, laying the groundwork for lasting peace. And we can see that it's been very difficult to bring people together around discussing peace in the Middle East lately, but there seems to be some hope right now. So UPF organized humanitarian responses, and he discussed in particular the earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria, and the role, including the role of UPF Lebanon, and the Association Sans Menottes. It's a French organization active in Syria. Then he reported about Morocco, and Dr. Hajiba Ayubi gave more information about the Solidarity Caravan that was organized for the 2023 earthquake in Al Huz province. She detailed her involvement in coordinating humanitarian caravan, which aimed to provide aid to residents of the Amar Ghat village. So Dr. Ayubi emphasized the importance of collaboration, community involvement, and transparency, as well as accountability to enhance the impact of NGOs. Mr. Binod Paudel finally talked about his involvement in the terrible earthquake that happened around Antakya, where 53,000 people died. And they work to provide a safe place for children to learn after their school had been destroyed. And so this was followed by comments by Dr. Michael Jenkins, brought attention to the importance of NGOs, and Mr. Larry Moffat as well emphasized that NGOs can quickly pivot to provide need for help. So all this, we're very gratified to see that just yesterday there was another event, or not organized by IMAP, which highlighted David Fraser Harris as moderator, and Ehud Omert, who unveiled a plan, a pathway for peace. So I think this is a wonderful conclusion to this year.
Thank you, Pierre, for those comments and insights. Again, we have our YouTube channel where you can see the entire webinars and share those with your community. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Ray Lipowcan. Ray has produced programs at Pittsburgh Community Television that highlight the international and national activities of the Universal Peace Federation. These shows can also be seen in Philadelphia and the Denver markets, as well as on Ray's YouTube channel. So we'll put that link in the chat as well for you to explore. So Ray currently serves as the executive director of the Universal Peace Federation for Western Pennsylvania. And thank you, Ray. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Hans, for the introduction, and Merry Christmas to everyone, and Happy Holidays. And as has been mentioned, this is somewhat of our year in review and looking at all the webinars we've done. And it's really been a rewarding experience for us, because sometimes we live in the present. We don't always reflect on what we've done in the past, and we can see how so many different topics that we've covered really in depth. We had a lot of really wonderful, great guest speakers. So the first webinar I did this year was back in January, and we discussed the possibilities of Korean unification. And two guests I had. The first was Mr. Etienne Dao. He's from Montreal, Canada, and he's done extensive research in North Korea, as well as visiting there numerous times himself. And he commented that the leadership changes in the United States and South Korea and Japan over the last several years, and each of the leadership has different approaches to Korean unification. So this contributes sometimes to the uncertainties in the Korean situation. And he mentioned about Kim Jong-un's rhetoric, as we all know, has been threatening. And sometimes he focused this past year a little bit on needing to improve the economy and the quality of life in North Korea. So that was a hopeful thought there. The second speaker is Mr. Michael Breen, who's the founding chairman and CEO of Insight Communication Consultants in Seoul, South Korea, where he resides. And he highlighted three areas that he felt can be, in a sense, diminishing hopes for reconciliation. The first was just the uncertain global environment of the worsening U.S.-China relations, of course, the war in Ukraine, and the conflict in the Middle East with Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah, etc. And of course, now we see the collapse of Syria. So this area is always in flux. And so there's constant updates on this. His second comment was about North Korea's changed attitude toward reconciliation with the South. And the third point was South Korea's, what he felt was increased hostile attitude toward the North. But as we know, just in the last couple of weeks, we may be seeing somewhat of a change in leadership in South Korea. So perhaps that can lead to some more peaceful thoughts on that end. But both speakers concluded just leaving a door open of hope, and that peace is possible. The second webinar I held was in June. And it was is media reshaping our religious perspectives and beliefs as well as our moral values. And the panelists were Professor Terry Mattingly. He's a religious columnist and he's a senior fellow at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. And he writes a Substack newsletter that he calls Rational Sheep. You can all research that and follow him if you like. And he mentioned that in many instances, there's a lack of coverage of good religious stories and events. Rather than promoting positive religious stories that would enhance the public's perception of religion, he said that the media a lot of times ignores these stories and they focus on sensational religious stories, which can create a negative bias towards religion. So we're trying to focus on this, on the media's portrayal of religion, and then how that can change our perspective of religious or our religious attitudes. And he also highlighted the fact that journalists a lot of times give their own perceptions on an issue without really considering the people's faith perspective. And that can lead in turn to a conflict within the faith communities who feel that their views or their perspectives or their belief is being misrepresented. And another thing that has to be considered also is the reporter well versed on that topic? In other words, is the person really well versed in religious matters? Maybe it would be like sending someone to cover the Super Bowl in the United States if they had no idea what sports is all about. So of course they could not really give a fair comment on the game. The second speaker was Doug Bandow, and he spoke a little bit more on global issues. And Doug is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. And he stated that religious practices and beliefs are tolerated more widely in stable democracies. And I thought that was very astute. We could see here in America, of course, with our democracy, of course, there are situations that do arise with religious persecution, but compared to what we see in other countries, the stories we hear as Peggy did the program, what's happening to the Uyghurs in China and also in Hong Kong, and we can see the Taliban in Afghanistan and also throughout Africa. Many unstable countries, you see a higher rate of religious persecution. And he mentioned that how people perceive their faith can have extraordinary consequences for those around them, and that geopolitical situations are rooted in a matter of faith. And he cited as examples the conflict with Israel and Hamas, and also the internal conflicts taking place in Myanmar and Sri Lanka. And the third webinar I did this past October was titled Immigration in America, Welcomed or Unwanted. So a lot of times our communities, our immigrant communities in the United States are facing a lot of difficulties, a lot of misunderstandings, isolation, and even persecution. And I try to focus a little bit more on the positive aspects of immigration. A lot of times, again, the media portrays immigrants as just the crime situations and things like this, but really, what do the immigrants contribute to America? And our two panelists, the Honorable Joy Garrett, who's currently state representative in the state of New Mexico, and Dr. Mariver Montalban, both gave examples of their immigration stories from their past. And then, of course, I chimed in myself of my grandparents coming from Eastern Europe in the early 1900s. So all of us, unless we have blood ties to the Native Americans, are immigrants in America. So I'm trying we need to have the media show the positive impacts of immigration as well. So Dr. Marival talked a little bit. She recently got her doctorate degree from the HJ International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership, and her thesis was Bridging the Political Divide of U.S. Immigration Reporting Through Transformative Journalism. So she gave a nice overview of history of immigration in America, again, including her own family. And she suggested as a conclusion that journalists should dig deeper and provide unbiased context to help people understand the complexities of immigration. And she also continues to work on the immigration issues through her website, her online magazine, and her podcasts. And our second panelist was, again, the Honorable Joy Garrett from New Mexico. And she spent 28 years as a teacher in the school systems in New Mexico. So she has a lot of experience because obviously New Mexico being a border state with Mexico, a lot of situations dealing with the families of immigrants. And now as a state legislature, of course, she's really on the front line as well there. And she had just recently attended a conference with some officials from Mexico and the border states here in the United States on the immigration issue. So she stressed the importance of addressing these issues through law enforcement and legislative efforts. And as a conclusion, both speakers emphasized the need for a balanced view in media reporting rather than just focusing on one side of the story. And they both also emphasized the positive side of immigration, one being the economic contributions of immigrants, like their income, their tax contributions, and emphasizing the human side of immigration, which is also sometimes overlooked by the media. And our UPF International President, Dr. Michael Jenkins, made some closing comments as well, just hoping that we can get more bipartisan efforts legislatively in the United States to ease these immigration problems right now. So thank you so much again for joining us this past year, and we're looking forward to an exciting year of new topics in 2025. So thank you, Hans.
Okay, thank you, Ray, for those comments and insights. And again, we have everything on our YouTube channel, and you're welcome to come and take a look at that. As a matter of fact, you're welcome to participate, be a volunteer, get involved in producing some of these webinars yourself. It's a learning process, but it's very effective, and you can have a voice that can speak to the world. So with that in mind, I'll try to share a little bit about the two webinars that I produced this year. The first one was in, let's see, hang on a sec.
Nice.
Okay, so the first one was Japan's dissolution order of the Family Federation for World Peace, a case study of media manipulation. So, as you recall, after the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on July 8th, 2022, by the son of a member of the Family Federation, formerly known as the Unification Church, the Japanese media immediately seized upon this tragic event as an excuse to accuse the church of wrongdoing. Although the church was also a victim in the attack, the media and its guests were successful in blaming it, the church, and creating an environment in which the church's leaders, believers, and supporters were not allowed to speak in its own defense. Only hostile voices were broadcast or interviewed. Politicians responded to the media frenzy by pledging to dissolve the church, although it had broken no laws. How have we come to the point where the media in a democratic nation such as Japan, a strong ally of the United States, can abandon long-standing journalistic ethics and basic fairness, such as telling all sides of an issue? This is especially relevant when it is the government that is attacking an entity, in this case, a religion. So the purpose of a free press is to be a watchdog on the government and other higher powers on behalf of the people. So although we presented this webinar in April, the issue is still current. The courts are still trying to make a decision on whether or not to close down the Family Federation. So on our webinar, we strove to show that a provocative view shaped by the media in Japan to reinforce a preferred narrative resulted in drowning out all dissenting voices. Our panelist, Dr. Michael Mickler, Distinguished Professor of Historical Studies at HJ International Graduate School for Peace and Public Leadership, and Mr. David Fraser Harris, Secretary General of UPF in the Middle East and North Africa, and Ms. Cheryl Wetstein, Senior Advisor of the Times Global Media Group, shared insight on media manipulation in Japan. Dr. Mickler highlighted the fact that only 2 religious organizations have been dissolved in post-World War II Japan, and in both cases, the organizations had been convicted of unpardonable criminal offenses. This was not the case with the Family Federation, which has not been accused or convicted of any crime. This sets a dangerous precedent that can easily be applied to other unpopular religious groups. Dr. Mickler's presentation left us with a question that has yet to be answered. Will Japan, as other modern democratic societies, uphold the rights of minority religions consistent with its constitution and law despite public pressure? Mr. David Fraser Harris started out by clarifying that the current climate in Japan vis-a-vis the Family Federation is one of extreme hostility and prejudice to Family Federation members based on the biased media coverage. He recounted incidents throughout history in which religious believers were persecuted only after first being demonized and dehumanized in the public square. He suggested that a mob mentality has been created and supporters are afraid to speak up. Mr. Harris provided context to the current situation by recalling previous serious legal threats to the status of the Family Federation that had been overcome in the United States, Europe, and other nations. Cheryl Wetstein, herself a journalist for decades, offered commentary on the presentations of both Dr. Mickler and Mr. Fraser Harris. She reminded us that the sacred job of a journalist is to present both sides of a story. Given that the media is the most influential force in the modern world because it informs and shapes public opinion, the media should be a positive and constructive force in an educated society. The press gathers legitimate information and presents it in a coherent way. If the press presents a half-truth, it is presenting a half-lie at the same time. In Japan, Ms. Wetstein let us know that she has learned that the press is being pressured by the Kishida government not to print any positive news on the Family Federation. She knows of journalists there that are alarmed by the current state of affairs and are working to make their voices heard. So I'll place a link for Dr. Mickler's recently published book, The Unification Church Movement, Elements in New Religious Movements, for your review in the chat. Okay, let's see. I'm going to share the other flyer for the second webinar I did. Okay. Freedom, faith, family, or diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, America at a Crossroads. This webinar explored the impact of various philosophical worldviews through ideology and their historical consequences. Dr. Frank Kaufman, founder and president of the Settlement Project, and Dr. David Burgess, its educational director, summarized their current work with WIC Education, an acronym for Woke Ideology, Critique, and Counterproposal Education. Our panelists revealed the consequences of replacing a God-centered worldview with human reason, materialism, or race and gender-based models. Reformation and education, not violent elimination of one sector of society by another, is their proposed solution. Our panelists emphasized that wokeism should be understood as applied postmodernism or post-enlightenment, which redefines the identity of the individual and thus creates a world without meaning or purpose, in which everyone lives their own truths, with total disregard for the greater good. Power is the God of wokeism. It's essential its potential for destruction is more far-reaching than the previous revolutions. Wokeism is an attack on identity. Our God-given freedoms are essential for love to bear fruit in families. Healthy, God-affirming families are upstream from culture and politics. Most people in our world are deliberately religious. They know the claims of wokeism that identity is socially constructed is contrary to their faith. Dr. Kaufman emphasized that interfaith harmony is a necessary force to counter the woke ideology. Wokeism is false by nature, but the love within the family is true by nature. The counterproposal to woke ideology is for people of faith to live genuinely loving lives in service to others and to create loving families. Dr. Michael Jenkins, UPF president, concluded the webinar with a short commentary on the order of creation and the purpose of life. When a wrong ideology impacts our worldview, it often leads to the denial of truth and the creation of our own subjective identity. I decide who I am, what gender I am, etc. This is the essence of the DEI agenda, leading to a self-destructive individualism and total chaos in society. I'll place a link to the recent published book on woke ideology, critique, and counter-proposal education in the chat for your further reading. Okay, that's a wrap for us, and we are so grateful that you are all here with us today, and we hope that the presentations have sparked some interest in perhaps participating in some way with the IMAP group. I just want to thank Peggy and Pierre and Ray. Any final comments before we wrap it up here?
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful holiday with your family.
So we now end 2024, and we have hope for peace in the Middle East. There's a road work, so let's all really pray for peace and peace in the world in 2025.
And thank you everyone for your support for our IMAP group this past year, and happy holidays. We wish you the best for 2025, and hope you can join us again in the coming year for some new exciting topics that we'll be discussing.
Again, on behalf of the IMAP team, we thank you for your participation today and wish everyone a joyful holiday season and a happy new year.
Merry Christmas, we wish you Merry Christmas. We wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Merry Christmas, we wish you Merry Christmas. We wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. La 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 la. Goodbye, everyone.
Happy New Year.
God bless.
God bless.
Great program. Thank you.
Good job, everybody.
Thank
Very
you
wonderful
so
program.
much. Thank you.
This
Thank
was a
you.
wonderful
Very nice.
program. Thank you for the review.
Merry Christmas.
And Happy New Year.
Thanks, Hans.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and God
Thank
bless
you,
you.
Hans.
And we
God
hope
bless
to see
everybody.
everybody on this program next year, okay? You're all panelists. Come
All right.
on.
Next year, let's conclude in Hawaii.
Yes.
We're waiting for
Thank
you.
you to Ray and to Pierre for your presentations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you
God
again.
bless everybody. Happy holidays
Bye.
and the blessed
Yeah.
Thank
New
you.
Year.
Holidays. Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Bye.
God bless.
Happy Hanukkah and all holy days.
Thank you.
Universally.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
please look at
Bye.
some of these publications that we posted in the chat, and check out our YouTube station, and also Ray's YouTube station. I mean, he's broadcasting in a lot of different markets around the country. So if you're in a big metropolitan area, all you need to do is send us your information, and we'll contact the local, public television station, and we'll send recordings to them that they can air every week. So I heard down in Central and South America, they were very successful with this kind of television broadcasting. Many people joined them. So, the resource is there. You just have to give us your information. What we have to do is sign up like a membership for the local public access station. It's usually like 10 or 20 bucks a year. And then, Ray is producing these recordings all the time. And he
Hans, I missed something there. So we contact you to be able to do this?
yeah, I just put my phone number in the chat. So just give me a call or text me,
Oh,
and
okay.
then I'll explain more of the details to you. But it doesn't cost a lot. But we have a broadcast right now in Philadelphia, out in Denver, and in Pittsburgh. And those three markets alone, there's 1 million people that are watching these public broadcasting stations, and we have 3 or 4 programs going on almost every week. So it's gonna start doing something. So, and if you'd like to be a panelist, or if you have somebody, a professional in some area that you'd like to recommend, please give me a call. We're always looking for panelists, and you see the broad spectrum of topics that we're covering. So anything is open to review as far as a media perspective. So please help us in this way. That'd be very very useful for us. Okay. In the meantime, enjoy Christmas Eve. Okay, and then Christmas Day tomorrow. We'll see you next year, possibly. Take care.
You also. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.